Rasputin feel unsafe. And when opponents did cross him, he increasingly threatened to take it up with the Tsar. But the thing was, Rasputin wasn't being paranoid. They really were out to get him. More press theme, but this time with a new and dangerous element. The claims that he was a German spy, pushing Nicholas toward peace with the Central Powers. A particularly toxic accusation, given how he was now so associated with Alexandra, whose already low popularity had dropped even further due to her German heritage. One Duma member, Vladimir Purushkevich, went so far as to give a speech calling the royal couple marionettes of the evil genius Rasputin, and saying that Alexandra had remained a German on the Russian throne, alien to the country and its people. The speech was purposely incendiary. A year before, demonstrators had called to have Alexandra banished to a convent, and mobs had killed ethnic Germans in Moscow. Purushkevich was playing with fire, but a fire that drew others. Because after this speech, Purushkevich found himself approached by Prince Felix Yusupov, one of the richest men in Russia, who invited Purushkevich into a plot to kill Rasputin, along with himself, an army officer from an elite guards unit, and Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, the Tsar's cousin. December 29th, 1916, Yusupov Palace. A cold night in St. Petersburg, a good night for a housewarming. And that's what Rasputin has been told this is. A celebration of the palace's renovations nearing completion. Prince Yusupov, a man who has come to him for healing, getting close to him for years, ushers him into a basement room with a gramophone playing Yankee Doodle over and over. Before dawn, Rasputin will be shot 3 times. That's the only thing we know for sure, because the only accounts of that night come from people who have every reason to lie, to shift and spread blame, to make Rasputin out to be a monster whose killing was justified by his demonic refusal to let death take him. Prince Yusupov's account, the most famous, claims that he served Rasputin cyanide-laced cakes and tea. Yusupov says that he sat there in awe as Rasputin gobbled them down with no ill effects. Next, he says, he plied him with poisoned wine, which again did nothing. A man prone to believing in the supernatural, Yusupov began to panic. He says he went upstairs, got a revolver from other conspirators, and then returned, telling Rasputin to look at the crucifix before shooting him once through the chest. Stashing the body in the basement, the group dressed an army officer in Rasputin's coat and drove the man to Rasputin's apartment so witnesses would see him going home. Then they went to move the body. But when Yusupov lifted the corpse, it came alive. Rasputin, wounded, clawed at his would-be killer, then scrambled to his feet and fled into the snow of the courtyard, the assassins following. And that is where Grand Duke Dmitry put him down with 2 shots, one point blank through the forehead. Then, with it perilously close to dawn, they dropped him off a bridge into a river through a hole in the ice. Now, it should be noted that historians don't generally believe Yusupov's account. It doesn't match up to the memories of other conspirators, and Yusupov himself had a lifelong fascination with theatricality, melodrama, and play acting. And there are plenty of other theories. But one thing most everyone can agree on: these guys were in no way professional killers. They'd never murdered anyone before, and because the post-mortem examination found no trace of poison, it's been suggested that Yusupov's supplier hadn't even given him real cyanide. Instead, the whole thing, from start to finish, seems like a drunken botch job by aristocratic flunkies. Alexandra insisted the plotters be shot, but Nicholas quietly transferred them to the front or confined them to their estates instead. And when word spread that the police had pulled Rasputin's body out from under the ice, people came to the river where they found him and scooped buckets of water as if it were sanctified. It was an expression of the old Russia, one that did not have long to live. For 2 months later, when winter food prices led to looting and police opened fire, riots broke out. The February Revolution had begun, and by March, Nicholas had abdicated and was living under house arrest with the provisional government in charge. In October, the Bolsheviks seized control. Of course, this would have likely happened without Rasputin. After all, with 1.7 million Russians dead in the war, hunger throughout the country, and an aristocracy refusing to modernize, there were more than enough historical forces to drive change. But there's no doubt that Rasputin played a role, providing a concrete figure the opposition could rally against. And once he was removed, the criticisms he'd absorbed for years instead fell personally on Nicholas. In looking back, it's hard not to think of Rasputin as a figure of our modern age. One who, whatever the truth, had his public image defined through partisan press, conspiracy theories, and the distortion of fame. one whose memory could be defined by men like Iliador and Yusupov, who had both literally tried to kill him and then wrote books about him, casting him as a wicked advisor or fairy tale sorcerer who brought down a monarch. Ultimately, Rasputin serves as a warning against being seduced by a good story, one that's too cut and dry to be true, because history isn't like that. It's messy, full of contradictions, often told by people who are unreliable, deeply biased, or that don't know the whole story. And if those stories work hard enough, they can change a man in the eyes of history into one who never really existed. Which just goes to show you how powerful people's creativity can be. And on that note, I think it's time I checked out more courses from our friends over at Skillshare. For the uninitiated, Skillshare is an online learning community featuring thousands of inspiring classes for creators, letting you explore new skills and deepen existing passions. Plus, since Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, that means there are no ads like this one, and they're constantly launching new premium courses so you can focus on wherever your creativity takes you. Lately, I've been trying to figure out exactly how really awesome logos tick, and found the class by Aaron Draplin, Logo Design, Secrets of Shape.
We have strolled across our world as giants until we finally faced our David. And by the time
Alexandra. And he spoke to them about the importance of love of God, the family's love for each other, and the love of one's fellow Christians. But it got a level deeper in 1907, when Alexei fell and Alexandra called for Rasputin to come heal her boy. Rasputin arrived, prayed over the child's bed, and made the sign of the cross over him. Then he told little Alexei that his pain would go away, that God would heal him, and that he should get some sleep. Then he left, and Alexei got better. He fell asleep, and the hemorrhaging stopped. And by the next morning, he was sitting up, free from fever, and recovering. Now, how did that work, you might be asking? Well, historians have debated exactly why, short of divine intervention, that this would be the case. One theory is that Rasputin often threw out the doctors, who were giving Alexei blood-thinning aspirin as treatment. Another is that, perhaps purposely, Rasputin tended to show up just as bleeding episodes were ending, while still others say that Rasputin's presence simply calmed Alexandra, whose anxious behavior often scared Alexei, which led to increased blood pressure and further bleeding. Even Nicholas himself noticed how Rasputin helped Alexandra's anxiety. Once when the Prime Minister complained about Rasputin visiting the family, Nicholas reportedly said, "Better 10 Rasputins than one of the Empress's hysterical fits." Rasputin increasingly visited the Romanovs in their private apartments, even being allowed to play with the children, pray with them at bedtime, and speak alone with Alexandra in her room. Now, this was extremely unusual for someone not in the family, particularly being around the girls in their nightdresses. But the Tsar and Tsarina were not alarmed, and other servants were present. The children treated him sort of like a kind and fun uncle. Meanwhile, Rasputin was using his new legitimacy to move up in the world. He went back to Pokrovska with money, buying a bigger house, and showing the villagers a shirt Alexandra had sewn for him. He also started bringing his followers around, almost all women, of both aristocratic and non-aristocratic status. He would give tours of the village, promoting the spirituality of the peasant lifestyle, have his followers stay at his house, and bathe with them at mixed-gender bathhouses, which was scandalous in high society, but common among peasants at the time. And that's when the investigation started. The priests of Pokrovska accused Rasputin of heresy, and both the Orthodox Church and Tsarist secret police began looking into Rasputin's connections to the Klistis and rumors he was sleeping with followers. Aristocratic gossip circulated that Rasputin was bathing with the children at night, sleeping with Alexandra, and had impregnated Olga, the eldest Romanov child. Now, to anyone in the inner circle, these stories were patently and obviously false. But they also primed the royal family to dismiss more credible accusations, like that Rasputin had raped one of his female followers. Then the scandals reached another level, as Russia's newly emboldened press got wind of them. The stories of Rasputin became front-page news, even as former promoters turned on him. Theophan said the holy man had been corrupted by high society, and Hermogen had a revelation in prayer that Rasputin was a demon. In fact, of his church allies, only Iliador stuck by him. Though that wasn't really saying much, since by this point Iliador was way off the deep end. He'd begun claiming major government ministers were secretly Jewish Freemason socialists, started printing images of Jesus, but with Iliador's face, and barricaded himself in his monastery in a months-long police standoff. But Nicholas and Alexandra didn't budge. Even when the Minister of Internal Affairs came to the Tsar and shared the results of his investigation,